Chapter 20, Lord Voldemort's Request. Let's see here. Harry has another meeting with Dumbledore, and picking up about pages 427 or so. Dumbledore says, okay, now we're getting into even murkier territory. He says, you know, we had very few memories of Tom Riddle when he was at Hogwarts. And so he says, if it was difficult to find evidence about the boy Riddle, it has been almost impossible to find anyone prepared to reminisce about the man Voldemort. He says, in fact, I doubt that there is a soul alive, apart from himself, who could give us a full account of his life since he left Hogwarts. But Dumbledore has found some. He talks about how Voldemort, you know, excelled at everything in school. He left school, and then he goes to work for Borgin and Burkes. Harry's like, what? Borgin and Burkes, says Dumbledore. I think you'd see the attractions of the place. And so he talks about Hokey, who worked there. And we're going to skip some. And Dumbledore tells Harry that it turns out Voldemort was more attracted to Hogwarts than anybody ever could have expected. And then he goes on, Dumbledore does, about page 430 or so, 429 or 430. And Dumbledore says, the castle of Hogwarts is a stronghold of ancient magic. Undoubtedly, Voldemort had penetrated many more of its secrets than most of the students. Okay? And thirdly, as a teacher, Voldemort would have had great power and influence over young witches and wizards. In other words, when he left Hogwarts, Voldemort wanted to come back and be a teacher. For three reasons, Dumbledore believes. One, it's where he'd been happiest as a person. Two, the castle's a stronghold of ancient magic. And three, Voldemort would have had power and sway over students. Harry says, but he didn't get the job. No. Dippet told him he was too young at 18. Invited him to reply in a few years. Okay? So, Voldemort goes off to work for Borgin and Burkes. And once more, they go into the Pensieve. And they go into the memory of a house elf, Hokey. And so we see, in this memory, the young Tom Riddle come to a woman's home, and she shows him some things. Okay? About page 433 or so. She shows him, Hepzibah, shows him a cup with a badger on it. And Voldemort says, this cup was Helga Hufflepuff's, she tells him. As you well know, you clever boy. This has been handed down in the family. Okay? So she takes the cup, gives it to the elf, who obediently boxes it, takes it away. And then she says, I think you'll like this one even more, Tom. Come in, a little closer. And she shows him a golden locket with an S on it. And Voldemort says, Slytherin's mark. That's right. I had to pay an arm and leg for it, but I couldn't let it pass. Not a real treasure like that. Burke bought it, apparently from a ragged-looking woman who seemed to have stolen it. Voldemort's ears have got to perk up at that. Okay? So there you are, Tom, dear. I hope you enjoyed that. She has just shown him 2 authentic relics of Salazar Slytherin. Okay? He already has one, we now know. He's got the ring. So Dumbledore says it's time for us to leave. Dumbledore tells Harry, Hokey the house elf was convicted by the Ministry of poisoning her mistress's cocoa. Harry can't believe it. And Dumbledore says, well, but he did. Or he was convicted because he admitted it. Again, he'd had a memory planted in him. Okay? And by the time Dumbledore says, about page 435 or 436 or so, he says, Hepzibah's family had realized that two of her greatest treasures were missing. Okay? So Dumbledore says, I hope you will understand in due course exactly what those objects meant to him. But you must admit, he probably thought of the locket as rightfully belonging to him. It had been Slytherin's. He was the last remaining heir of Slytherin. So he's got Slytherin's locket and Slytherin's ring. But now he also has a cup that belonged to one of the four founders of Hogwarts. Okay? So Dumbledore says, and now for the very last recollection I have to show you, at least until you manage to retrieve Professor Slughorn's memory. He says, 10 years after this, another memory. Harry asks, whose memory is it? Dumbledore, mine. And now, Dumbledore is the headmaster of Hogwarts, not Armando Dippet. And Tom Riddle comes back. This is about page 438 or so. Tom Riddle comes in. Dumbledore offers him a seat. Dumbledore says, Tom Riddle says, I heard you become headmaster, a worthy choice. Dumbledore says, I'm glad you approve. May I offer you a drink? Voldemort says, that would be welcome. Notice the niceties, the manners. Dumbledore fixes him a goblet of wine. And Dumbledore says, so Tom, to what do I owe you the pleasure? And Riddle says, they do not call me Tom anymore. These days I am known as... I know what you are known as, but to me I'm afraid you will always be Tom Riddle. To these days I am known as Lord Voldemort. I know what you're known as. You'll always be Tom Riddle to me. In other words, that's Dumbledore's way of kind of saying, to me, you'll always be that 11-year-old boy that I invited to Hogwarts. Okay? Harry notices a tension fills the room when Dumbledore does this. Dumbledore's refusal to use Voldemort's chosen name was a refusal to allow Voldemort to dictate the terms of the meeting. And Harry could tell that Voldemort took it as such. There's another reason why this is important. There are no aristocratic titles in the magical world. We don't hear people called Lord so-and-so, Duke so-and-so. We do hear about the guy in the portrait, Sir Cadogan, called Sir. Okay? But that's not the title like a lord is. It's not something you're born into. You can be made a knight, and even then, Sir Cadogan is a portrait. He's a painting on a wall. We never know whether or not he was a real person who then got put in a portrait. But we never hear about anybody else who is a lord other than Sir Mimsy Porpentin in the first book, the Headless Hunt. Again, that's a title that has been awarded. Okay? So they keep talking, and we find out Dumbledore's been offered the position of Ministry of Magic 3 times, turns it down every time. Okay. And then Voldemort says, I have returned, perhaps later than Professor Dippet expected, but I have returned nevertheless, and I'm requesting once again to teach. I think you must know that I have seen and done much since I left this place. I could show and tell your students things they can gain from no other wizard. Implying even Dumbledore himself. Dumbledore, yes, I certainly do know that you have seen and done much since leaving us. Rumors of your doings have reached your old school, Tom. I should be sorry to believe half of them. Dumbledore says, In response to riddles, greatness inspires envy. Envy engenders spite. Spite spawns lies. Dumbledore says, you call it greatness, what you've been doing? Certainly. I've pushed the boundaries of magic further perhaps than they have ever been pushed. Of some kinds of magic. Of some. Of others you remain, forgive me, woefully ignorant. Okay? Now notice, that's pretty important. You've pushed the boundaries of some kinds of magic. What kinds? Obviously of dark magic. But he says of others you are ignorant. Ignorant means you know nothing. Tom Riddle. The old argument. But nothing I have seen in the world has supported your famous pronouncements that love is more powerful than my kind of magic. Dumbledore. Now let's take that apart. Nothing I have seen in the world. What has he seen in the world? What has Tom Riddle experienced of love? What love did he experience at the orphanage? None. What love did he really experience at Hogwarts? None. What love has he experienced outside of Hogwarts? None. Where has he searched for love? Nowhere. He has experienced one bit of love. When Albus Dumbledore invites him to Hogwarts, that is an act of love. Okay? That's why Dumbledore says, perhaps you've been looking in the wrong places. So Tom Riddle says, well then, what better place to start my research anew than here at Hogwarts? Give me a job here, and I will place myself and my talents at your disposal. I am yours to command. Dumbledore raises his eyebrows. What about those who will be under your command? What about those whom you call your Death Eaters? Voldemort says, oh, my friends, they'll go on without me. Dumbledore, I'm glad you consider them your friends. Why? Because friendship is an aspect of love. I was under the impression that they are more in the order of servants. You are mistaken, Voldemort says. Dumbledore, oh, okay, I'm mistaken. So if I go to the Hogshead bar tonight, I won't find not Rozier Mulcible Dollhoff? Ah, omniscient as ever, Dumbledore. No, just friendly with the local barman, who we find out is his brother. So Dumbledore says, okay, let's speak openly. What do you really want? Why are you really here? We know that you are not here to request a job you do not really want. Voldemort, a job I do not want? On the contrary, I want it very much. No, you want to come back to Hogwarts, but you don't want to teach, Tom. What is it you're after? Try an open request for once. And if you don't want to give me a job, of course I don't. And I don't think for a moment you expected me to. But you came here. You must have had a purpose. Voldemort looked up. He looked less like Tom Riddle than ever, his features thick with rage. This is your final word? It is. Then we have nothing more to say to each other. And Dumbledore says, no, we don't. The time is long gone when I could frighten you with a burning wardrobe. And Voldemort leaves. Okay? We'll stop there and pick up at that same passage for the next lecture.